All right, thank you and welcome again and good afternoon. I am not just going to talk about the sealer study, I'm going to give an update on the National Bridge Deck Preservation Working Group. I am a co-chair with Pat Martins, who you just heard speak. So it's a great partnership. Again, we talk about partnership for these meetings, for the Midwest and all the other 4 partnerships, but also with the working groups. It's a partnership of industry, academia, and the state and local agencies. So it's a great opportunity to get involved too if you would like. There's a lot of great working groups out there on both the national and regional side. Also would like to thank Stephen Austin from Texas DOT, who's the secretary of the group, and Andy Nanneman in Arkansas DOT, who also helps with the leadership of the group. I want to update you on a couple of initiatives that the working group has been leading. The first initiative is the Concrete Bridge Deck Preservation Resource Guide, and then I'll talk a little bit about the sealer synthesis study and the bridge product database. The resource guide is really just intended to provide a brief overview of the various practices that owners can use for deck preservation. It's a high-level resource really meant for those agencies that are just getting started with bridge deck preservation, or perhaps people who are new within their agency, new to the preservation side. We highlight various different types of deck preservation actions in this guide, and then provide links to other resources to help you get more information on these different types of actions. The guide starts by defining bridge deck preservation. So we've heard this in some of the other presentations, but preservation really is they're actions that prevent, delay, or reduce deterioration. It's meant to keep the bridge deck in good condition, fair condition longer, and to extend that service life. The deck, we talk about the deck too, it's really a protective element, right? So it also, in addition to the riding surface, it protects those elements that are underneath, so it's really critical and important to maintain that element, to protect those underlying elements. Selecting appropriate actions can depend on a variety of factors. One of the most critical is the deck condition and the deterioration on the deck. So typically when a bridge deck is in good condition, your maintenance strategy is predominantly cyclical maintenance, preventive type maintenance, and preservation. But as that bridge deck deteriorates, you're looking more at condition-based maintenance, more major preservation actions, and rehabilitation. Some of the other factors that go into it, though, too, are agencies may have preservation rules that they're looking at as when to perform a certain type of action and on what type of deck to perform that action, what condition level it's at. You might also look at the environment that it's in or the traffic levels that the bridge deck sees. In addition, you could look at the design details, right? When was the bridge constructed? What type of reinforcing steel is in the bridge deck? How much concrete cover do you have? What are the chloride levels that this bridge deck sees? And finally, as we look at these bridge preservation actions, we also need to evaluate the benefits of performing these different types of actions and the costs associated with performing the actions. And also think about the bridge deck itself, or the bridge itself, in the corridor planning aspect. How much service life is remaining on the deck? How much service life is remaining on the other components, the superstructure and the substructure? What is the long-term goal of that corridor? The guide looks at preventive maintenance activities all the way through to major preservation, flushing and washing, which is used to clean the bridge decks, the joints, the drains, to reduce that potential for contaminants to accumulate, and also to keep those joints and those drains functioning as intended. Sealing, to limit the ingress of water and chlorides to the reinforcing steel. Joint maintenance, which is performed to facilitate that proper movement, and also to protect, keep that seal intact to be able to protect those underlying elements. Concrete repair to reestablish the quality and integrity of the concrete in the bridge deck. And then overlays. A lot of different types of overlays that we use to minimize intrusion of moisture, intrusion of chlorides and other contaminants to the bridge deck, and also to provide some improved ride quality, possibly skid resistance. We also talk briefly about some other actions, and I'll talk about those in a slide in a few minutes. So again, like I mentioned, it's really a high-level resource. Each preservation action is briefly described. It's typically on one page, and the idea is to give you a description of the activity, list some of the benefits that are associated with performing that type of activity, and then listing some best practices. Pat talked about construction quality and also talked about following, how important it is to follow that spec, right? And so we list a few best practices here, that those are not all the practices to follow. We're working with the construction quality work group to update this as they get more information from their various types of research that they're performing. We're also in the process of updating the overlay sections because of the new pocket guides that will be coming out. Pat Martin's just mentioned that. Nancy will go into a little more detail after my presentation. And so this is a document that will evolve. It will be continuously updated as we find out new innovations, new technologies, new best practices that we should be incorporating into this guide. And finally, that last section gives you a link to the different resources that are available that can provide you with more in-depth information, so you can take a deeper dive and look into performing those types of activities. Some of the other preservation actions that are mentioned briefly in the guide are cathodic protection, chloride extraction, joint elimination, and preserving bridge decks with traffic-induced distress. You can find it on the TSP2 website. If you go to Bridge Preservation for AASHTO TSP2, click on Technical from the menu at the top, down at Deck and Joints. It is listed under the second heading, Bridge Deck Preservation Guidance, and it's the second link. I have a little arrow pointing to it, Concrete Bridge Deck Preservation Resource Guide, and I also provided the link on the bottom of the slide. So it is available for anyone to look at and utilize. And if you have any comments or questions on that guide, feel free to reach out to our working group. The second initiative that I wanted to talk to you about was the sealer synthesis study. This is one that's an ongoing effort. There are 3 tasks that are involved. We are working with Dr. Bill Jin at Michigan State University. And the first task started in May. It is a literature review and a survey. Many of you may have seen the survey come through your agency, and we appreciate all the responses we've received to date. We are still working through some of those responses and updating those within the report. We just received that draft report, and now we're working into finalizing that report and moving into Task 2, which has started. And Task 2 is a white paper that will synthesize current practices from different agencies in different topic areas related to sealing specifically. And then finally, the third task will be an NCHRP problem statement, basically looking at the information that we've collected from Task 1 and Task 2 and figuring out what other research may be needed within this area. For the work plan, we're looking specifically at 2 methods, deck sealing with penetrating sealers and crack sealing. In each of these areas, then we're identifying specific pieces of that, looking at agency practices for triggers of when sealing is required, what the recommended intervals are for each type of sealing, what general products types are being used, what approved products list or performance evaluations are needed for those products to become onto those approved products lists, and then current practices also with regard to surface preparation application. When we compile all that data together, are there any regional differences that we may be looking at? This is preliminary data. We're still working on gathering the information from the survey and putting it into practice in the document. When the draft report was submitted, we had 32 state agencies that had responded to the survey and 1 local agency, DOT, New York City. We have since received additional responses, so we are in the process of incorporating those responses into this data. I have a couple of slides that show some, again, very preliminary data, but we have to follow up with a few agencies before it's final. We were hoping to be a little bit farther along in this process, but we're still reviewing the draft report. So we'll provide more information as it's available. So deck sealing with penetrating sealers. So Michigan State proposed looking at some of this data on a map so that we could identify some of these regional differences, which I thought was interesting. And so you'll see the green performs deck sealing and the blue does not perform deck sealing. Approximately 69% of the agencies surveyed performed deck sealing with penetrating sealers. The activity is predominantly performed by contract or by a combination of in-house and contract forces within an agency. The most common generic product type used is silane, and approximately 34% seal on a cyclical basis, but the interval ranged from about 3 to 10 years. So I don't have a lot of these data points on the slide right now because, again, it's preliminary and we're trying to compile additional data to make it a little bit more complete. For deck crack sealing, we asked the question about what method used for deck crack sealing, whether that be by flooding the deck or by sealing individual cracks or crack chasing. There are a mix of methods. You can see the green performs both methods by certain agencies. Some agencies only flood seal the decks, typically, and some agencies typically just crack chase. Similar to deck sealing, the activity is predominantly performed by contract or by a combination of contract and in-house forces within an agency. The predominant type of crack sealer product includes epoxy and high molecular weight methacrylate. Approximately 25% reseal on a cyclical basis, and that cycle was typically reported as 3 to 5 years, but there were some agencies that had a longer cycle. Again, these are preliminary results and subject to change, but I wanted to at least give some information on what we've compiled to date. So what's next? Like I mentioned, we received the Task 1 draft report. We have reviewed, the working group has reviewed and provided comments back to the researcher. They are in the process of responding to the comments, and then we'll finalize the Task 1 report, which included a lit review and a compilation of the survey results. Task 2 will take information from the lit review, specifically including agency specifications, agency best practice documents, maintenance manuals that were provided and also available on websites. Take that information and compile it for a summary of current practices. And then from that summary, they'll identify regional differences. And then based on that information, I mentioned this before, but the research will determine what additional research or information is needed in the area of sealing. And some of the questions they might ask are there inconsistencies or are there regional differences that we need to explore further? Do we need to evaluate performance differently or come up with different methods to evaluate performance? Is there more information needed in, more research needed in the areas of surface preparation or application, or what type of intervals we're looking at for resealing? And that will be developed into a problem statement for additional research. The third initiative is the Bridge Product Database. This is available on the website. If you go to the front page at AASHTO TSP2 Bridge Preservation, on the right-hand side, you will notice there's a Bridge Product Database. I have it highlighted here. And it is a database of products and technical data for overlays, sealers, and deck patching products. The working group is in the process of developing a plan now to update that information because some of the information has been on there for a couple of years. And so we will be reaching out to vendors and industry members to update that information to make sure that it's current on that page. And I wanted to mention too that if anyone's interested in joining the working group, I believe we meet the third Thursday of the month at noon Central time frame. So if you're interested in joining, one of the more recent initiatives too that we're trying out is peer exchange. And so for each group, each meeting, we have a technical presentation typically, but then we'll also have a roundtable discussion on the different preservation practices that agencies are using, or perhaps some of the agency rules that they're employing to identify those practices. At the last meeting, we had a presentation by Dr. Hoda Azari about the research that's going on at the NDE lab. And then we had a discussion about some of the NDE practices that the agencies are using. So if you're interested, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Pat Martins, and we can invite you to those meetings. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for?
Josh, I thought we talked about no questions.
Not putting you on the spot, sir. I found out a few weeks ago that there was a AASHTO notice of intent to actually put concrete sealers through net PEP. So I don't know if anybody else has heard that, but Kentucky is one of the 11 states so far with that criteria. We've had some issues in the past, not really issues, it's just, this vendor wants to use this sealer, this vendor wants to use this sealer. There's not a real good mechanism to test that, especially with the, the salt ponding test takes like 3 years to complete or something. So NPEP will be looking at concrete sealers.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.